What's a dark secret or questionable practice in your profession that the public know nothing about? Story 1. I work as a scheduler in oncology at a local hospital, and it's eye-opening to see how insurance affects patient care. In the U.S., doctors often prefer certain types of insurance because they pay out faster than others, like state-run insurances. As a result, patients with private insurance or certain plans get scheduled sooner than those with VA benefits or Medicaid, even though everyone's medical needs should come first. In oncology, this means patients with terminal illnesses are being scheduled based on the type of insurance they have, not their actual medical needs. Doctors also have to worry about liability. If a doctor misses a significant change in a patient's condition, like the growth of a mass in their abdomen, the patient can take legal action. To protect themselves, doctors will often order unnecessary scans every 3 to 6 months, even if the patient doesn't really need them. This creates a situation where insurance companies overestimate the cost of care for conditions like cancer, and hospitals end up wasting resources on procedures that aren't needed. Regardless of where you stand on universal health care, it's clear that the healthcare system in the U.S. is deeply flawed. By making doctors legally responsible for patient outcomes, the focus shifts from providing compassionate care to protecting themselves financially and legally. It's all about self-preservation rather than putting patients' well-being first. Before we continue, do us a quick favor. Smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. In the United States, a serious issue in substance abuse treatment known as body brokering has emerged. Addiction treatment is often extremely costly, with insurance companies covering substantial expenses for patient care. Some treatment centers exploit this by hiring body brokers, individuals tasked with finding addicts who have high-paying insurance policies and persuading them to enroll at specific facilities. In return, brokers receive a commission from the treatment centers, paid out of the insurance money. This practice can become disturbingly unethical. In some cases, brokers have reportedly supplied drugs to addicts before admission to ensure higher levels of substances in their systems. This manipulation can lead to extended treatment durations and increased payouts from insurance companies. Additionally, some brokers operate in a pyramid scheme-like fashion, recruiting other addicts to enter treatment, befriend fellow patients, and later encourage relapse after discharge, creating a cycle of repeated admissions and ongoing profit. Story 3. I'm a personal trainer in my mid-20s, and what I'm about to share applies equally to both male and female trainers. This mainly pertains to the lower-end gyms that serve the general public. When you move up to higher-tier gyms, where the coaches are well-educated professionals and the clients are serious athletes, this behavior is much less common, though not entirely unheard of. It's definitely rare in these settings. It's a well-known, albeit embarrassing, fact in the fitness industry that some personal trainers sleep with their clients, regardless of their relationship or marital status. The combination of a young, attractive, and often vain workforce with minimal professional standards, there's virtually no barrier to entry, and revealing clothing, especially when it comes to female clients, creates a problematic dynamic. Add in the amount of time spent together, and it's almost inevitable that the training sessions become deeply personal. When you're competent and empathetic, you naturally become a confidant for many clients, offering them emotional support through major life events. I've had clients train with me on the same day they lost a family member or made the decision to leave their spouse. Personal training goes beyond fitness. It involves real connections. Unfortunately, some trainers exploit that vulnerability, taking advantage of the trust and emotions clients confide. Witnessing this lack of decency among some of my coworkers was eye-opening, and it definitely left a negative impact on my view of people in general. I assumed this was common knowledge, but every client I've mentioned it to has been completely shocked. As a man working in the fitness industry, I've noticed that many of my morning clients, mostly stay-at-home moms from the upper-middle-class neighborhood I work in, are there to see me, not just to work out. When I say this, people think I'm being arrogant, but it's true. I've been groped more times than I can count, simply because of the way I look. I've had married women openly tell me I'm bangable to try and get my attention, and women twice my age dissatisfied with their marriages, hitting on me. It's uncomfortable and inappropriate. Imagine if the roles were reversed, and I tried to do the same, there would be outrage. But I'm supposed to just take it as a compliment because it's flattering. It's not flattering. It's an invasion of my personal space and a serious boundary violation. As a doctoral student in physical therapy, first year I take my career and professionalism seriously, which means I don't engage in any behavior that could jeopardize my future. Luckily, my bosses are smart, and we have cameras in place to protect ourselves. I've also set strict boundaries. No physical contact with female clients unless it's necessary to prevent injury. Even with these precautions, some trainers still get caught up in inappropriate situations, and I've had to tell someone to sneak out the back door more than once to avoid an angry spouse who's figured things out. It's a messed up part of the job, and it can get pretty exhausting. Have I ever dated a client in my 8 years in the industry? Yes. I work 60 max 70 hours a week, and at the gym I'm confident in a way I don't feel elsewhere, but when I do date someone, it's always with the intention of a serious relationship, and it has never been with someone who wasn't single. Of course, I couldn't stop my partner from having a personal trainer, but I'd find it questionable if she insisted on training with someone I've never met multiple times a week when I'm fully qualified to help her myself. Being in the industry has really shaken my trust in people. It's tough when there are too many bad examples. Story 4. Ambulance companies and medical transport services often make it way too easy to agree to things without fully understanding what you're signing up for. In an emergency, in the heat of the moment, it's common to just sign a paper or tap on a tablet without thinking twice. Suddenly, you could be facing a $15K bill for transport, but for what, exactly? Don't sign anything in the chaos. You're stressed, hurt, or upset, and not in a good place to make legal decisions. Ambulance rides can cost thousands, and long-distance transfers, especially from rural areas, can run into tens of thousands. If you have a minor injury, like a stubbed toe, and a doctor says, "We don't have an orthopedic specialist here, but there's one 4 hours away," you don't need to take an ambulance if you're stable and aware of the risks of self-transport. This goes for all medical services. Always ask for an itemized bill before receiving any non-emergency treatment, and make sure you know what you're agreeing to. You deserve to understand the full cost of care beforehand. Story 5. Dental labs can vary drastically in quality. When you need a new crown, bridge, or denture, the dentist orders a custom prosthetic from a dental lab to fit the work they've done in your mouth. Some labs are state-of-the-art, clean, and meticulously maintained, while others are absolutely disgusting. Imagine a lab technician crafting a medical prosthetic while chain-smoking cigars inside, with old food sitting around for weeks, cigarette butts scattered on the tables, rusty equipment, and more. And then those prosthetics are placed in your mouth. Additionally, in some states, dentists can retain their licenses from overseas without attending an American dental school, and I've seen the results firsthand. The quality of their work is appalling. Coming from a family of dentists, I know what good dentistry looks like, and these practitioners are doing things like drilling out decayed teeth, but completely missing the correct spots, damaging healthy adjacent teeth, and exposing the dentin layer, which will likely result in those teeth needing crowns in the near future. It's malpractice at its worst. It's like going to a surgeon for gastric bypass surgery and having them accidentally damage your liver. It's frigging disturbing. This is why you go to a reputable dentist, and not the cheapest one possible. Story 6. Most live concerts use real-time auto-tuning with expensive equipment to enhance the singer's performance. Aside from a select few artists, most big-name singers don't write their own songs. They have entire teams of songwriters behind them. The cost of setting up a concert, including the venue, usually accounts for only about 1/8 to 1/5 of ticket revenue. This means they rake in huge profits and have the ability to manipulate their reported costs to pay less in taxes. When there are issues with the performance, like a missed beat or forgotten lyrics, the concert crew often takes the blame, and in many cases they're fired. After-party scenes often involve substance abuse, alcohol, and sometimes even sex workers, both male and female. More than 60% of the moments when a singer invites someone on stage or does something spontaneous are actually rehearsed and scripted to appear like a fun, down-to-earth interaction. If you're working with a major celebrity, you're likely required to sign a non-disclosure agreement, NDA, so most details about their personal lives, hobbies, and work habits remain unknown. Also, the sports drink cans or bottles artists drink from during their performance are just a publicity stunt. Companies like Monster produce water cans that look identical to their energy drink cans, so the brand the performer is drinking from is often just water. Story 7. I worked in advertising, and here's the reality: you're all being tracked constantly. We know where you sleep, where you work, and where you walk. We know what you want to buy, what you like, and even your age. We know virtually everything about you. In fact, we can predict when you might want to have a baby, or whether you can afford one. The idea of privacy used to mean something, but it's essentially a thing of the past. We don't need your personal information. You have a token like numbers in a database that identifies you. It doesn't directly link to your name, but trust me, if we wanted to, we could easily figure that out. To sell you stuff, we don't need your name. We already know everything else. People get paranoid about microchips and COVID-19 conspiracies. But honestly, why would we need that? Google already scans your emails, tracks your search history, and you willingly give us your location. Most people don't even realize that this level of tracking is happening. Every one of you carries a phone, right? And most of you use apps. Free apps are especially good for us because you just agree to everything, and we use those apps to track you. The funny thing is, we're still not great at figuring out if you actually bought something. If you bought a car or a house, we can easily recognize that. But if you Googled a toaster and then saw ads for toasters for a week afterward, that's because we didn't know you actually bought it yet. This is why there's a push in many countries to have companies like Visa and MasterCard process your card history, scrape the personal data, and sell it to us. This way, we can understand your buying habits, what you've already bought, and what you might need. We already do this to an extent. Some apps let you log in through services like SoFort, which helps us access your card history. We then tell you how much you're spending on what, but the real goal is to get your card data, strip away the personal details, and match it to our existing knowledge about you. It's no different than that Russian app that showed you how you'd look in 10 years. Everyone used it thinking it was a fun filter, but in reality, it was just scraping your biometric data for future use. Welcome to the information age. Story 8. Elderly residents in nursing homes are often heavily medicated, sometimes to the point where it amounts to chemical restraint. They're frequently given large doses of morphine, which can lead to dependency. Due to the nature of the drugs, many experience withdrawal symptoms an hour before their next dose, resulting in both physical and mental distress. Additionally, the morphine injections or drips administered to patients who are bedridden at the end of life, supposedly to make them comfortable, can actually act as a form of euthanasia. When given in large doses, morphine to a supine patient can depress their breathing, leading to respiratory failure. It's common for those who are no longer able to move to pass away from fluid buildup in their lungs, a condition worsened by morphine's impact on lung function. Furthermore, the privatization of healthcare, along with a lack of proper attention, often results in sick individuals receiving minimal care, leading to neglect and many dying alone. This was the situation even before COVID-19, but the pandemic has only made things worse. Story 9. Instagram influencers are a poor investment for most companies' marketing budgets. In nearly all cases, whether it's micro-influencers or those with millions of followers, the company ends up spending more on direct payments and free products than they make in sales from the influencer's promotion. But companies continue to do it because their competitors are doing it too. And influencers, by and large, can be difficult to work with. I get that people should know their worth and not undervalue themselves. But when you're giving them $2,000 worth of product in exchange for a post and a swipe-up link, only for them to come back asking for more money on top of that, well, you can keep your 10K followers. Then there are the influencers who just ask for free products because they're redecorating or building a home gym. And instead of spending their own money, they tell companies that being featured in their posts is payment enough. I've really grown to dislike influencers. Story 10. Your computer isn't as secure as you might think. If I have access to it, I can gain entry to an administrative account without knowing the password in under 5 minutes, depending on your computer's speed, of course. If your account is linked to a Microsoft account, it makes things a bit trickier, but I could always create a new admin account and remove your old one. I learned how to do this while working at Office Max, helping older people who forgot their passwords. If I'm not mistaken, this backdoor method has been around since Windows XP. I can also remove a system key SysKey in most cases, which is particularly useful when scammers lock up people's computers after gaining access, often targeting older individuals. All of this can be done with a Windows installation USB, which I can create using any regular USB drive and download the necessary files for free from Microsoft's website. No special tools required. Story 11. I'm a grave digger, and many people don't realize that the same people who escort the coffin to the grave are the ones who will be doing the actual burial. After the mourners leave, we change out of our suits and into our work clothes to get started. Before the burial begins, we have to loosen the chains of the lift that lowers the coffin into the grave. To do this, we enter the grave and step onto the coffin, then use a metal hook pole to lift it and release the chains. Another person will then pull the chains from underneath the coffin. Once that's done, we can remove the lift. In the West, most burial sites use heavy machinery, like cranes, to fill the grave with dirt. Between using the machinery, we sometimes stomp on the grave to pack down the sand and prevent it from collapsing when there's heavy rain. In some cases, this can damage the coffin lid, as most coffins these days are made from cheaper, weaker wood. The sand can end up filling the coffin as well. The standard process is something most people wouldn't expect. With the pandemic, we wear protective gear, and once the mourners leave, we disinfect the coffin before lowering it into the grave, as we need to stand in the grave to remove the chains and iron supports that prevent collapse when the grave is filled. It's also common for grave diggers to be atheists, and like many construction or landscaping workers, have a very blunt and dark sense of humor. We often compare ourselves to gardeners or construction workers in terms of work ethic and demeanor. When we have to exhume bodies, it's a tough and physically demanding process. The skeleton is usually buried under a lot of sand, and we have to pull and jank the body out. Since the bones are loose, it's rare to find a complete skeleton. Often, parts of the body, like pieces of a loved one's remains, may stay buried for years until the graveyard is cleared, at which point they can end up in industrial waste. Story 12. I work at a county jail in the Midwest, and one of the most disturbing aspects of the job is witnessing the vicious cycle many inmates, especially those with mental illness, get trapped in. Some individuals are deemed so high risk for self-harm that they aren't allowed any clothing or personal items, and they spend 23 hours a day isolated in their cells. This extreme isolation often worsens their mental state, fueling anger and frustration. When they're finally let out for a short break, they sometimes lash out at staff due to the buildup of emotional and psychological distress. These outbursts then result in further lockdowns, and the cycle continues, often making their mental health deteriorate even more. Unfortunately, staff have very limited options. Allowing these inmates to interact with others can lead to lawsuits, especially if the person has a history of violent behavior. Most psychiatric hospitals refuse to accept them due to the risk they pose to healthcare staff. So many of these individuals remain stuck in isolation, with their only real chance at stability being consistent access to medication. Story 13. Have you ever started filling out a form, maybe on an insurance website or for a quote on something, only to change your mind halfway through and think, actually, I don't want to give them my personal info, and then exit before hitting submit? If you assume that kept your information private, think again. Many companies that rely on lead generation capture your details in real time as you type them in. That submit button? It's often just a trigger to move you to the next page. It's not what sends your information. By the time you abandon the form, they may already have your name, phone number, email, or whatever else you started to enter. Story 14. I'm a licensed customs broker, and every day hundreds of thousands of containers and air shipments enter the United States. The sheer volume of customs entries processed daily is overwhelming. As brokers, we undergo extensive training not just in regulations and procedures, but also in ethics. We even take an official pledge to work in partnership with U.S. Customs and Border Protection (CBP), upholding the law and cooperating fully if we ever encounter anything suspicious. Why is there so much emphasis on ethics and integrity? Because, in reality, CBP can't physically inspect every shipment. To put it simply, the system largely operates on an honor code. When we file a customs entry declaring what's in a shipment, CBP generally takes our word for it and releases the goods. This happens hundreds of thousands of times each day. Realistically, only about 3–7% of all incoming shipments can actually be screened. The rest are cleared based on the accuracy and honesty of the submitted documentation. Story 15. At a well-known high-volume pizza chain, we used perforated pans specifically for thin crust and stuffed crust pizzas. These pans were run through the dishwasher hundreds of times a day, but even after washing, many still had burnt cheese and residue stuck to them. Instead of being properly cleaned again, they were simply stacked to air dry. Overnight, some of these pans developed small spots of mold around the leftover bits of cheese. Despite this, we were instructed to place fresh dough directly onto the pans anyway. The reasoning? Rewashing them would slow down production too much, and we couldn't keep up with the rush of orders. When concerns were raised, management brushed it off with the response, "Don't worry, it gets cooked." Story 16. A lot of performing musicians never fully get over stage fright, and that's more common than people think. Many rely on beta blockers to manage their nerves. It's not so much about calming the mind as it is controlling the body. When anxiety makes your hands shake or causes excessive sweating, it can seriously affect your ability to play. Beta blockers help by easing those physical symptoms. You might still feel nervous internally, but your body stays steady. It's not really a dark secret. Beta blockers generally have minimal side effects, but some people might view it as a kind of shortcut or crutch. Personally, I find it encouraging. It's a reminder that even experienced, talented performers struggle with anxiety too, and there are real tools out there to help, not just the old tough-it-out approach. Story 17. Many hotels, especially those near airports, regularly overbook rooms. Intentionally, I used to work at an airport hotel, and we'd routinely sell more rooms than we actually had, banking on the fact that some guests wouldn't show up due to missed or delayed flights. Because many travelers check out as early as 2 or 3 a.m. for morning departures, we'd sometimes take their rooms in quickly and not always thoroughly clean them for unexpected walk-ins or last-minute bookings. If a new guest arrived, we'd tell them there was a computer issue and ask them to wait about 20 minutes, buying time to turn over the room and hope the previous guest didn't leave any obvious mess. More than once, I've had to run a hot kettle under cold water just to make it seem unused, knowing the last guest had only just boiled it 15 minutes earlier. Story 18. The truth is, most of the articles you read online are written by people like me, and we often have no real expertise on the subject. We're given a topic, we Google it, then we rewrite what we find into a new article. As long as we include a few SEO keywords, that's considered a job well done. I've written pieces for HVAC companies, entertainment reviews, product listings, you name it. Honestly, there's so much I've written that I've completely forgotten half of it. If you're reading a blog post online, there's a good chance it's just recycled content, crafted more for clicks than accuracy. Want a good example? Check out the descriptions on Netflix. The vaguer the summary, the more likely it was written by someone who never actually watched the show or movie. If you really pay attention, you'll start to notice how many of those blurbs seem to have the same voice behind them. Story 19. I'm a documentary editor, and I can tell you while the goal of documentaries is to present truth, they are never entirely objective or purely factual. The ethics of documentary filmmaking are widely debated among theorists, but most of us who work behind the scenes understand that documentaries in many ways are just as constructed as fictional narratives. Of course, this depends on the type of documentary, but certain industry practices like frankenbiting, cutting and reassembling bits of audio to create a sentence or meaning that wasn't originally spoken are common, especially in reality TV and dramatic documentaries. It's not necessarily malicious. Often it's just the only way to make a watchable story out of hundreds of hours of raw footage. But it does mean that what you see and hear was carefully chosen and often altered to tell a specific story. Every frame exists because someone wanted you to see that instead of something else. That level of editorial control can have real consequences. People's lives can be deeply affected, even ruined by how they're portrayed. Someone might be framed as the villain or the fool, even if that's not reflective of who they are. I've had to take mental health days just grappling with the ethical weight of that, knowing that my choices in the editing room could seriously impact someone's future. Even nature documentaries aren't immune. A well-known example, the myth that lemmings commit mass self-own a living by running off cliffs, that came from a stage scene in Disney SIP's White Wilderness, completely fabricated, but now deeply embedded in popular knowledge. If you're wondering how to find truly accurate documentaries, the truth is, unless I personally worked on it, I can't confidently recommend any. Editors see footage in context that never make it to the final cut, and even we don't know the full story, only what's been filmed and handed to us, so claiming to know what was left out or twisted would be disingenuous. One film that stands out for its minimal editing is Blind Spot, Hitler's Secretary. It's been a while since I watched it, but I remember it feeling very raw, almost like the unshaped footage we'd typically be handed to build a more dramatic story. If I remember right, there's even a moment where the interview subject is allowed to watch the footage and clarify or correct herself, which is rare in the genre. Even basic edits, like removing ums and ahs, can subtly manipulate how someone is perceived. I once worked on a small local doc about state inventions, and the amount of editing we did just to make older interviewees sound smooth and camera-friendly drastically changed how they came across. They sounded like entirely different people on screen than they did in real life. Story 20. I work in alarm and camera systems for homes and businesses. And here's the truth, the monitoring center you're paying for is often a myth. In many cases, there's no dedicated team watching your feed. Alarms typically go to a call center that's juggling hundreds of other alerts, and honestly, it doesn't make much of a difference because police usually won't respond to unverified alarms anyway. Sometimes they won't respond at all. The equipment itself? Dirt cheap and incredibly simple to install. I had one day of training before I was sent into the field, and most of what I needed I learned through Google or YouTube. Seriously, everything from full system installs to override codes, even for systems dating back to the 90s, is freely available online. A lot of what security companies sell is basically junk, overpriced, and underperforming. You're better off buying the equipment yourself, used or new, on sites like eBay for a fraction of the price. Most used systems can be easily reset and reprogrammed. If you really want security, get a solid dog. But unfortunately, many people are locked into multi-year contracts for $30, $40 worth of hardware. Just something to keep in mind. Story 21. This might not be a huge secret, but a lot of the talk around how expensive lawyers are, or how plaintiff lawyers get outrageously high payouts for minimal work, is actually a tactic used by corporations to discourage people from suing them. For instance, most plaintiff lawyers work on a contingency basis, meaning they cover all the costs up front with the risk of not getting reimbursed unless they win. And almost all of them offer free consultations. But corporations spread the narrative that it'll cost you just to talk to a lawyer, which discourages people from even seeking legal advice and learning the real facts. Another common misconception is that plaintiff lawyers pocket huge sums for their cases. For example, you might hear a company say something like, "In this class action, each person got $2.50, but the lawyers got $250,000. What they don't mention is that the lawyers' fees were a result of the company fighting tooth and nail over a relatively small amount of money. The company could have settled early and paid far less in legal fees, but instead they dragged the case out, inflating the legal costs on both sides. Plus $2.50 per person across 1 million people adds up, so the lawyer's fee is proportional to the total amount recovered, not the insignificant amount per person. By controlling the narrative, companies make it seem unreasonable to be upset that they took millions from consumers. They also make it seem unfair that the lawyer, who takes on all the risk and is only paid based on successful results, gets a cut of the recovery. Sure, there are some outlier cases with huge windfalls, but those are rare and usually help offset the many cases where lawyers end up with smaller payouts. It's like putting $100 in a slot machine, losing 10 times and then hitting a jackpot on the last turn just to break even. Then the casino turns around and complains that you got $100 for a single spin, not mentioning all the losses you incurred to get there. At the end of the day, companies are projecting their own greed when they paint lawyers as the bad guys. The real goal is to minimize the chances of being held accountable for their wrongdoings. Story 22. I managed an Asian supermodel for about 5 years. often accompanying her to meetings with other celebrities, mostly Western though sometimes other Asians as well. Since I'm a native speaker and fluent in her language, I also helped her with English, ensuring she understood everything and didn't make any cultural mistakes. Many of the actors, musicians, and other public figures I worked with were also involved in various businesses and brands. I frequently witnessed them casually strategizing fashion trends they planned to set, ensuring they had products ready for sale to meet the demand they'd create. They discuss how to boost each other's businesses by reinforcing these trends with coordinated appearances and quotes in fashion magazines. The first time I overheard this, I thought they were just being arrogant, but then I started seeing the results a few months later, over and over again. "Here's what we'll have people wearing this fall," one said confidently. "Have we started production yet?" another asked. "Next week," came the reply. "Send me the sample when it's ready," the first person responded. "I so make sure my demographic is on it." "Your concert in NYC is in June, right?" "Yeah, I sup a medium," the other said nonchalantly. "Here's Sep's my manager Sep's number. She's Sep'll make sure I get it in time for the show." Story 23. Airline worker here. If your bag is being moved from the belt to the aircraft, or vice versa, and it happens to fall out of the bag cart due to faulty equipment, it's likely to sit on the tarmac for hours, regardless of weather conditions, before it's eventually picked up and sent on another flight to the same destination. And yes, bags do get thrown around. No supervisor really cares, unless someone slams it down on purpose like a wrestling move or something. Story 24. Service costs are often determined by how much you appear to be able to afford. As a woodworker and contractor, I visit your house, you tell me what you need done, and my starting point is based on what the market can bear. If I think you can afford a $4,000 solid oak bookcase, that's what I'll quote you. I could make a cheaper version, which would earn me less money, but why would I do that? It's not that I'm trying to rip you off. I'm offering a better product, and in doing so I make more profit. So when getting a quote, it's helpful to be clear about your budget, or you might end up being quoted for the most expensive option they think you can afford. The story 25. I've worked in veterinary medicine since 2013, and I've developed a habit, especially when owners choose not to be present for their pet's euthanasia. I like to give the animals little treats, pieces of my meal like chocolate, meat, bread, cheese, and sometimes even onions or garlic, before administering the euthanasia drugs. Since they pass shortly afterward, they don't experience any harmful effects from those foods. It's my way of giving them a taste of something they'd never otherwise get to enjoy. Of course, I only do this once they're already on their way to the room for the procedure. Story 26. You know how stores often ask if you'd like to round up your total and donate the change to charity? Well, the company is actually using that money to fund their own charity, which handles overhead costs and other expenses before passing it on to another charity. Plus, they use these donations as a tax write-off. You're better off choosing a charity yourself, saving the 5-10 cents each time, and donating it all at once. That way you get a small tax benefit and can ensure the money goes to a cause you've researched and support directly. Story 27. It's not a huge secret, and it's not necessarily shady, but for those who don't know better, it might seem a bit scandalous. The internet is held together by Velcro and twist ties. You know those perfectly organized cables you see in photos of pristine data centers? Well, that's how a tiny fraction of equipment and cable runs actually look. To add a bit more context, most of the infrastructure is a mess when it comes to documentation. Companies merge, get bought, or close down, and people who understand how things work leave. As a result, documentation for any cable run or piece of equipment can range from meticulously detailed to completely non-existent. We had a situation recently where a certain provider, I won't name names, had a fiber cut. The fiber had passed through at least 2 different companies before merging into the current one, and there was absolutely no documentation on it. They traced the break to 70 miles away from our data center. Without any documentation, they had no idea what route that cable took, so they were left with a 70-mile radius to search. They basically had a guy at one endpoint sending signals while techs randomly drove around opening manhole covers, guessing where the cable might go. 5 hours later, they decided to try narrowing it down from the other end. Story 28. I work at a hotel that hosts conferences and large events like weddings, and I would strongly advise against having a host bar, where one person like the company owner or the bride and groom's family pays for all the drinks for the evening. It's a common practice for my bosses to come in and randomly press buttons on the register, increasing the bill without actually serving any guests. If I catch them doing this, I immediately kick them out because it's not right. They don't get paid more if we sell more at the bar, so the only reason they do it is to try to show off to their boss. Story 29. When you order pizza with unpopular toppings, things that aren't chosen often, you're likely getting a mix of fresh and spoiled ingredients. This happens because pizza kitchens have to refill their topping containers weekly. If management doesn't enforce cleaning out the old ingredients, you might end up with rotten or rancid meat and veggies. Edit. I didn't expect my most popular comment to be about my less than stellar pizza past. For those asking how this could happen, the district I worked in had management that was highly interchangeable. Managers and GMs would move from store to store weekly, and the lack of cleanliness became more of a tradition than a mistake. Most of the employees were young, some potheads, no offense, and older guys, along with a few younger women just trying to make quick cash. If they aren't told to care, they won't. So even if leadership drops the ball, the store keeps running, especially since the district manager's check-in is just making sure everyone's wearing a uniform before walking out. Story 30. Church worker here. This may be specific to the church I work for, but I believe it's common in larger churches, 1,000 plus members. They act two-faced. They'll tell the janitorial crew that janitorial service is truly a ministry and it's so important. But when it's time for cutbacks, we're among the first to be affected. We're expected to clean until 2-3 a.m. on Sunday mornings after events have run late into the night. As a woman, I've been harassed by someone high up in the church hierarchy, and no one really has my back. There are so many fake, judgmental, and hateful people who hide behind Christianity. I've seen people locked out of the building and laughed at. If someone doesn't dress presentably enough, they're told to sit in the back or worse, stared at with cold, hateful looks until they leave. This is everything a church in Christianity shouldn't be. Edit. Yes, I know. Churches are terrible isn't exactly a secret. Edit 2. Just to clarify, I have never attended this church, nor do I currently. My parents are members, and they put me on the membership list. I even officially canceled my membership. The only connection I have to this church is through my job. Story 31. When you walk into a phone store to get a new mobile and we ask if you're an existing customer, it's because our best deals are often reserved for new customers. Also, if we tell you we're out of stock on a popular phone, it's sometimes because we only have a couple left and we're saving them in case we can use them to close a deal with a new customer. If you want the best deals, you often need to switch to a new provider. You could leave my store after I tell you we don't have the phone, walk into the store next door, switch your number to a no-contract plan with them, then walk back into my store saying you want to bring your number from a competitor. At that point, I'll suddenly find the phone you wanted in the back. Story 32. Although not my industry, I was researching it before being laid off. Antimicrobial doesn't mean much on its own. Right now, many products claim to be antimicrobial for obvious reasons, but it's important to note that antimicrobial is not the same as antiviral. It doesn't prevent COVID-19, and most products claiming to prevent it have only been tested against substitutes from cats. Furthermore, products can be advertised as containing or using antimicrobials, but this usually means the antimicrobial just protects the product from things like fungal or bacterial degradation and doesn't offer any protection to you, the user. For a product to be marketed as antimicrobial, it does have to prove effectiveness, but that could be against something like strep, staph, or another microorganism much larger than the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So don't buy antimicrobial products or even cars thinking they'll protect you from COVID without doing proper research. Story 33. I used to work in fast food, but I once say where pretty much everyone I worked with had tried marijuana. But that SEP's nothing special. Let SEPs take it a step further. The truth is, most of us end up working here because we don't have many other options. Either we grew up in poverty with no chance to go to college, or we made mistakes in our youth committing crimes or struggling with drugs and alcohol. In my state up north, we got a raise from minimum wage to $10 an hour. Thanks to the virus, we were deemed essential workers during the crisis. But when you walk into a fast food place, Think about why we're there. Yeah, we've made mistakes, and we're facing consequences. But that doesn't mean we're bad people. One of my coworkers was an ex-cartel member with face tattoos. He was one of the nicest people I've met, much kinder than some of the older white customers we served. He's twice the man as many people I know. People in fast food are here for a second chance. Please let us have it. Story 34. Schools often lower their admittance standards for international students because they rely on their tuition fees to stay financially stable. The more cuts the system makes to public education, the worse this issue becomes. Not only does it result in lower teaching standards due to outdated infrastructure and overcrowded classes, but it also diminishes the overall skill level of the students. I've seen students who couldn't speak any English attend classes. I mean no English, starting with the basics like hello my name is, or I, you, he, she, it, and even basic words like chair, desk, and table weeks into their program. The way class hours and modules are structured makes it nearly impossible for them to take 2 months off for full-time language courses to catch up. Instead, they end up wasting everyone's time, including their own, while struggling and failing for months. Story 35. I work for a pharmaceutical company, and here's the thing, most drugs sold under one brand are the exact same as those sold under another brand. The packaging might be different, the tablet might look different, and the marketing might vary, but there's often just one manufacturer behind both products. The choice of which one to buy comes down to your personal preference. Logically, you'd think you'd go for the cheaper option, right? But surprisingly, the more expensive brand often has higher sales. Why? Simply because people trust it more. That's the power of marketing, my friends. It convinces you to buy things you don't necessarily need and makes you believe you need them even when you really don't. Story 36. There's a lot of corruption in nonprofit organizations that claim to do good. Many of these organizations inflate project budgets with unrealistic costs that don't reflect the actual market prices for goods and services. The strategy is simple. They quote exaggerated costs in their budgets, spend only a fraction of that money during the project's implementation, and pocket the difference. This practice also extends to the funds meant for the beneficiaries. I've seen projects where a staggering 80% of the budget goes towards staff salaries, equipment, and other resources, leaving less than 20%, sometimes much less, actually going toward helping the people the charity is supposed to serve. Story 37. Anyone studying to be a teacher will quickly realize that most teachers don't fully understand what they're teaching and often have just a day to prep. Also, the amount of bad-mouthing that happens about the students can be pretty harsh. Safety isn't always a top priority either. I've worked in theaters where you could easily cause a fire just by turning on some lights and the heater. And strangely enough, nearly every theater I've worked in has ghost stories, complete with full-on apparitions. Here's a lighter, yet still surprising, one. Many people who work with ice cream are lactose intolerant. I'm not sure if the bosses think that will keep them from eating the ice cream, but trust me, they still do. It was pretty funny learning how many of my coworkers could clear a room after sampling a new flavor. Story 38. I work at a 5-star hotel, and if you file a complaint, we're required to document it in your guest profile along with how we handled it and the final outcome. That's not a secret, of course. However, what most people don't know is that every staff member in the hotel can read those notes. Yep, even for fun, and we have the freedom to word them however we choose. So if you're rude or aggressive with your complaint, rest assured the whole team will know about it before you've even finished your rant at the front desk. You'll become that guest. And trust me, we're all going to dislike you. We also know when you're lying or exaggerating to get free stuff, and that'll be noted too. If you're being dishonest, you won't get anything for free. So do us all a favor, be honest, and we'll gladly help you out. Story 39. Building codes are typically followed correctly only in really important or large buildings. Even then, you'll sometimes find things like a public library where you can only access books via stairs. In my first architecture job, I was taught some fundamental fire safety codes incorrectly. At the time, I was just a technician, and I didn't study architecture until years later, so my bosses handled most of the code analysis. It wasn't until much later that I actually cracked open the code books and learned the correct procedures to avoid getting sued. Ever since then, I've encountered the same mistakes on almost every job, and no matter how many times I explain the issues, the problem still persists. There are countless buildings out there designed for half the required occupancy, all because architects and plans examiners refuse to admit they're wrong. Story 40. I used to work as a travel agent, and it's pretty standard practice to inflate prices or flat out lie in order to increase the agency's profit, margin, and commission. While it's not an official policy, there's a lot of pressure to do so. If you refuse, like I did, you're made to feel guilty for not hitting your impossible sales quotas, which are largely based on scamming customers to boost profits. If you manage to hit these unrealistic targets, your commission percentage increases, leading to a much bigger paycheck. I earned far less than my colleagues, and was often singled out and made to feel guilty about my productivity, constantly questioned on why I wasn't making the company as much money as others on the team. Story 41. In the food service industry, if you're consistently unpleasant and repeatedly complain about the same things, don't expect free food, special treatment, or priority service. You'll get the same food and service as everyone else, and it may even be the bare minimum. If you keep this up, we'll continue tolerating you, but if you push it too far, we'll have no problem asking you to never come back, and we'll make sure management follows through on the ban. We don't resort to unsanitary behavior like spitting in food to get back at rude customers. We take pride in our work and our reputation. Our team puts care into preparing food for employees, friends, and family. Seeing someone act out of line would be like seeing your brother ruin a family meal. It's unacceptable, and we'll deal with the situation professionally. If you're difficult, we'll do what we can to get you out of our space as quickly as possible. If we sense you're not going to leave soon, we'll drag things out, making your wait longer in the hopes you'll get frustrated and leave. If you keep complaining, your food will take even longer to replace. We don't need to hear about the same issue for 10 minutes. We understand your frustration, but please let's keep it respectful. For those who frequently complain about mistakes like cold food, we're happy to fix it the first time. But if we notice this is a recurring issue with you, don't be surprised if your food comes out overcooked. You'll get your food last in a group, and the server will simply say, "That's how it comes." We won't remake your food 3 times for free, so please don't ask. And if you try to lecture us about what fresh food looks, tastes, and feels like, save it. We're the ones who handle it daily. From prep to cooking to holding times, we know what food should look like, and we know when it's no longer fit to serve. We throw away food that doesn't meet our standards, so don't assume we don't know what we're doing. Story 42. I worked at a small chain of Japanese restaurants in college, owned by 2 Taiwanese women, and there were a lot of questionable practices. Here are a few that stick out. We had a tip jar at the register, and there was also one of those UNICEF donation jars near the drinks. Employees never saw a cent of those tips. And the charity donations? Yeah, they were pocketed by the owners. The delivery driver was responsible for picking up or dropping off the cooks at their house, whether they started early in the morning or finished late at night. One of the owners, Carol, was the main reason people constantly quit. She was incredibly rude and loved to berate people. A particularly favorite tactic of hers was to sharpen her sushi knife next to you while you were washing dishes, then suddenly slap you on the arm with the back end just to scare you half to death. Carol had this habit of watching the cameras and calling the restaurant. If she saw you standing around yelling at you over the phone, it was definitely an environment that made you question a lot. Story 43. Also, the training at these companies is rushed and minimal, so the person doing your taxes might not know much more than you do. The IRS isn't as intimidating as people think. You're unlikely to be audited, and even if you are, it's not a big deal unless you're actively trying to cheat on your taxes. Story 45. Childcare in Australia requires maintaining specific staff-to-child ratios, but some practices are used to stretch these ratios, and they can be concerning. A common tactic to reduce staff on the floor is to count children under the roof. Essentially, this means placing children from one room in a different age group into a room with fewer kids to balance the ratios. For example, a toddler room may have a 1:5 ratio, but if there are only 2 toddlers, staff will fill the room with children from the kindy room. As a result, you might end up with 13 kindy children to 1 staff member and just 2 toddlers in the room. While this isn't the worst practice, it's used frequently and can continue throughout the day, which affects both the children and the staff. A more problematic practice is transitioning children to higher ratios before they're truly ready. For instance, a child as young as 18 months in a 1:4 ratio might be moved to a 1:5 room if they are developmentally advanced. Story 46. I work as a website analyst, where my job is to evaluate website designs, traffic, and other data to find ways to improve them. Most of you are probably familiar with tools like Google Analytics, which lets me track things like site visits, page views, and general interests. But what you might not know is that I can also watch video replays of exactly what users do on a site. There are various tools that capture recordings of users' actions on a website. These recordings are like screen captures, allowing me to watch everything from where your cursor moves to what you type, even as you navigate across different pages. While these tools have automatic systems to censor sensitive information like addresses, they aren't always perfect, and I've often seen personal details that I shouldn't have. To be honest, I don't think this is okay. Statistical data is one thing, but these recordings feel like an invasion of privacy. It's my least favorite part of the job, especially since I strive to advocate for privacy. However, at the moment, I'm not in a position to speak out about it. Story 47. I'm a medical scientist who's fairly advanced in my career, with as many publications and citations as some of the tenured professors. It's not exactly a hidden truth, but I'll be honest, scientific publishing is fundamentally broken. Before starting my career, I would have been one of those people on Reddit saying, trust the experts or don't question science. After years of working in the field, though, I've become a massive skeptic of everything published. How is the system broken? For starters, when you submit a paper, you can suggest reviewers, and peer review is not blind. This means you can choose your colleagues to review your paper. They know you're the author, and they can give it a favorable review. It's essentially a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours situation. Secondly, funding applications are typically only successful if they have the potential for media coverage or if they build on an already proven idea. This means that if I submit an application for something radical or unconventional, it won't get funded. My livelihood depends on me finding small, safe gaps in existing knowledge and claiming them as my own. I've also witnessed bad data being misrepresented, p-values being misinterpreted and manipulated beyond recognition, and absurdly exaggerated conclusions being passed through peer review for personal gain. I've seen respected professors spend hundreds of dollars of charity funds on extravagant dinners and first-class flights, and I've seen scientists take kickbacks from private companies in exchange for helping them profit from their research. Science is no less fallible than any other field, and skepticism is crucial. Story 48. Group homes for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities are often plagued by neglect at every level. Staff are paid poorly and do the bare minimum to avoid getting fired, which is hardly anything since management only focuses on keeping the houses accredited, and keeping accreditation just means ensuring everything looks perfect for the one day a year when the home is being audited. As a result, clients receive poor nutrition because the responsibility for shopping falls on low-level staff, many of whom are living in poverty and have poor eating habits themselves. Fresh fruits and vegetables are rarely consumed, with meals typically consisting of low-quality, pre-packaged foods like frozen lasagna. Basic hygiene is neglected as well. Clients' bottoms are rarely cleaned, showers only happen when someone is visibly soiled, and teeth brushing is infrequent at best. Therapies that could be skipped are often ignored without consequence. It's an appalling system. Story 49. I used to work as a nuclear power technician on a U.S. Navy submarine. The nuclear engineering field is seriously understaffed worldwide, but the demands for plant maintenance have remained high. As a result, a lot of the necessary maintenance simply doesn't get done. If you look through a ship's nuclear engineering records, you'll see documentation for most, if not all, of the required maintenance tasks. However, I'd estimate that at least 25 to 50% of those records are fabricated. The work was never actually completed. This isn't a secret. Everyone involved knows it. The technicians know it. The ship's engineer knows it. The captain knows it. Even the Department of Naval Reactors is aware, and no one seems to care. The U.S. Navy's nuclear power plants have stayed safe up to now mainly because the original engineers decades ago designed them with massive safety margins. Since leaving the Navy, I've worked with the Department of Energy, the International Atomic Energy Agency, NASA, and several private companies, and I have never encountered the kind of widespread falsification of engineering records that I witnessed in the U.S. Navy. Story 50. I'm an insurance adjuster. And I'll be honest, how much we like you can influence how much you get paid. For example, I might have a sweet, polite elderly couple whose roof is completely totaled. They have a huge deductible, and their policy is ACV, actual cash value only. In cases like that, I might adjust the roof size and add extra items to make sure they get enough money to cover their deductible and the depreciation, leaving them with no out-of-pocket costs. On the flip side, if someone's difficult or rude, I'll follow the policy strictly, and they may miss out on thousands as a result. Also, roofers pay us for leads. I usually get about 3% of any claim that they land a contract on. Recently, I had a claim worth $3.5 million, and the roofer I referred landed it. I made a nice $75K for a single day's work. It's definitely unethical, but given my pay rate, it's hard to resist. Story 51. Commercial organic farming is a corporate monster no different to non-organic commercial farming, with the same focus on profits rather than health or the environment. They don't care about your well-being or sustainability. They care about the bottom line. Commercial organic pesticides are less effective, more toxic to the environment, and linger in the soil at least 3 times longer. They're also particularly harmful to aquatic life, especially when affected by groundwater or irrigation runoff. With organic farming, crop losses tend to be higher, and yields are lower, meaning even more pesticides are required to achieve the same amount of produce. In contrast, non-organic pesticides are highly regulated, tested, and designed to target pests more precisely, causing less ecological damage. These pesticides can also be updated and improved to become safer and more efficient over time. In the end, large-scale organic farming is actually worse for the environment than conventional farming. The corporations behind it are just looking out for their profits, with little regard for anything else. This shouldn't be confused with small-scale, home-based organic farming, which operates on a very different level. Story 52. In certain situations, the police may use individuals who have been previously convicted of a crime as inside sources. For example, if they uncover a PDF file ring and need more details to make arrests, they might plant someone who has already been convicted of pedophilia to gather information. When these individuals are used as informants, they must ensure they don't instigate or organize any criminal activities themselves. They are only allowed to go along with what the group plans to do, otherwise they could face charges just like the others. This serves as a safeguard to make sure the cases against the others are legitimate and not fabricated, while also keeping the informant in check. While this may sound troubling, the rationale behind it is that the informant, who is prohibited from bringing more victims into the situation, helps gather crucial information, which allows the authorities to eventually make arrests and dismantle the operation. This approach is known to happen in the UK, although I can't speak to how it works in other countries. To clarify, I'm not part of the police force, but I studied law enforcement at university for the past 3 years. Story 53. In the mental health field, there is still a significant amount of stigma and misunderstanding, particularly around certain mental health conditions. Many providers openly express frustration about working with clients who have psychosis or personality disorders, and unfortunately, these individuals are often treated poorly or discriminated against within the very institutions they seek help from. Dissociative disorders, in particular, are poorly understood, and individuals with these conditions are often misdiagnosed with more stigmatized disorders, such as borderline personality disorder or treatment-resistant schizophrenia. If you're dealing with any of these issues, don't let this discourage you from seeking help. There are compassionate and skilled professionals out there who can support you. It's important to remember, though, that not every provider will be a good fit, and unfortunately, you might encounter a few who aren't the right match. It may take meeting several therapists or psychiatrists before you find the one who truly understands and can help you. But don't give up. You deserve the support that will lead to a healthier and more fulfilling life. To help in your search, I recommend checking out the ISSTB provider listings worldwide, Psychology Today's Therapist Directory US and more, or asking friends who have gone through mental health treatment about their experiences with their counselors or psychiatrists. These resources can help you make informed choices about who you trust with your mental well-being. Story 54. I'm not sure if this is widely known, but I can offer a bit of insight into how things work behind the scenes in the medical field. My mom is a specialist physician who owns a private medical practice, including an infusion center and a wound care clinic. I've worked there over the summers doing insurance billing, so I've seen how things operate. As a specialist, doctors typically get referred patients from other physicians. For example, if a foot doctor spots an infection, they might refer the patient to an infectious disease specialist. When you see the patient, if they need further treatment, you give them your business card and direct them to call your practice to schedule an appointment. However, physicians don't get paid until they bill the insurance company. If a patient has Medicare, the reimbursement rates for procedures are fixed and much lower than what you'd get from a private insurance patient. Private practices have the discretion to accept or decline patients, so they're more likely to prioritize those with private insurance over Medicare patients because it's more financially beneficial. There's a minimum quota for Medicare patients that practices need to meet every quarter, but once that's reached, any additional Medicare patients are turned away. These patients are often stuck with the worst appointment times, or in some cases are told to find another doctor. The reality is, even if your primary care physician refers you to a specialist they believe is the right fit for your needs, there's a good chance they won't continue treatment if you're on Medicare. It's just not worth the time or financial compensation, so they often push you to seek out another specialist who may not be as skilled or suited to your needs. Story 55. I had an ex who worked at a marketing agency, and she once told me about a situation involving Vicini. The company behind the product had discovered that it was causing issues like red, dry eyes, and other dangerous side effects, even though the product wasn't supposed to do that. The company had made a mistake, but instead of pulling the product or addressing the problem, they tasked her agency with finding ways to keep selling it without anyone knowing the truth. Both the Vising company and the agency were fully aware of the dangers, yet the agency continued to market the product as if there was nothing wrong with it. During a meeting where they discussed the situation, everyone acted as if it was just business as usual. My ex was shocked, thinking, "This isn't ethical at all." A month later, she quit and went to nursing school, realizing that was the last straw. The reality is, marketing agencies often know about the dangers of the products they're promoting, but their main concern is selling as much of it as possible, regardless of the risks. Story 56. I worked for a so-called crystal healing guru who was always sick but made a lot of money teaching and writing about crystal healing, despite barely practicing it. She used her experience as a healer as the foundation for her classes and books, but in reality, she didn't enjoy doing it and only saw a handful of clients. Those clients had to chase her for months just to get an appointment. She learned the subject by attending classes and reading books, not through hands-on experience. Her health issues weren't her fault, but she definitely capitalized on them. For example, when she lost a significant amount of weight due to an inability to digest food, she claimed to her followers that it was crystal energy that had helped her slim down. I remember attending a talk by Neil Gaiman once, where someone asked him if writers of bizarre or dark fiction were dangerous. He responded with something like, "Not really. Fiction writers get the crazy stuff out of our system, but be wary of self-help authors. Those people are really crazy." He wasn't wrong. Story 57. In the furniture delivery industry, desks, closets, beds, etc., it's not unusual to find underpaid workers who put in overtime. Due to job dissatisfaction, they often don't take the care they should with your items, which can lead to damage. By the time your furniture reaches the delivery person, it may have already been mishandled, and the delivery person may not even be responsible for the damage. However, if they do notice any damage, they might not mention it. Some companies have policies where workers' pay is reduced if too many damages are reported, so many feel it's better to stay silent about minor scratches or damage. But remember, as a customer, you've paid for undamaged goods, and you're entitled to them. There are certainly honest delivery people who will inform you about any issues, but it's always a good idea to inspect your new furniture when it arrives. Most companies will refund for damages, though replacements can sometimes take months. Alternatively, you could negotiate a lower price for the damaged goods or choose to buy from trusted sources, Also, check what the delivery service includes. Some services will bring the furniture to your room, others may unpack it, and some even offer assembly. And just like with police officers, delivery personnel might slip in a seemingly harmless question like, if you want to leave the packaging here, it might be better to keep it, right? This is usually an attempt to avoid additional work, so they're often relieved when clients waive these services voluntarily. Lastly, when you have someone assembling furniture in your home, give them some space. No one likes being watched for hours while working. Just check the final result thoroughly. But remember, a little trust goes a long way. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.